The first sound was laughter, a low, intimate ripple that didn't belong to me, followed by my husband's voice, clipped and technical, as if he were reading off a weather report. "The brake lines will snap at exactly 45 miles per hour," Patrick said. Her reply, my daughter-in-law's voice, soft and certain, threaded through the heat rising in my ears. "Then the life insurance pays out immediately." I was standing outside her window in broad daylight, close enough to see their silhouettes lean toward each other with the eagerness of a secret. When the truth landed like a hand around my throat, they were planning to kill me and call it an accident. My name is Vivian Chen, 62 years old. I have survived cancer, bankruptcy, and the death of my first husband. I rebuilt from ashes and heavy interest rates, turned good guesses and long nights into a portfolio steady enough to sleep on, and raised my son Daniel to be kind in a world that rewards clever first. Patrick came into my life 8 months ago, introduced by Sabrina, Daniel's wife, at a family barbecue that smelled like summer and second chances. He brought grocery store roses each Friday and made a ceremony of rubbing my shoulders when my day had been long. Sabrina called every morning to check on me, a ritual I mistook for love. I believed I had gained a husband and, at last, the daughter I never had. What I had gained were 2 neat conspirators with charming smiles and a calendar. After I backed away from that window, I sat in my car for 10 full minutes, hands shaking so hard I pressed them flat against my thighs just to feel the weight of myself. I drove home at 20 miles per hour, checking the rear view every block, as if guilt would appear in the lane behind me. When Patrick came through the door 3 hours later with his bouquet, I put on the performance of a lifetime, arranging my face into the kind of domestic calm he had come to expect. Wonderful. I told him when he asked about my afternoon, and he kissed my cheek as if he hadn't just scheduled my death for Thursday night. The next morning, I opened my laptop like a surgeon opens a chest. I combed through our joint account, line by line, month by month. The pattern was delicate enough to hide in plain sight $50 here, $100 there. Always labeled something harmless, always small enough to feel rude to question. But 8 months makes a mound out of grains of sand. Nearly $12,000 had drained away to Morrison Consulting Services, a company I had never hired, and $500 a month. Like a heartbeat, to SB Holdings. Morrison was registered to Patrick. Of course. SB Holdings was registered to a maiden name I knew too well, Sabrina Chen, before she married my son. The pieces did not ask to be connected. They reached for one another like magnets. $2.5 million on a policy that would pay out immediately. A gambling debt of $200,000 to be erased by sudden tragedy. An innocent Thursday night book club near a lake road where breaks fail fast and grief faster. A lifetime of being told I was too careful or too suspicious, telescoped into a single, cold realization I had not been careful enough. Daniel called around 10, warm as ever. "Sabrina said you seemed confused yesterday," he said gently, and I heard the first sting of a story being written without me. "I'm perfectly clear," I told him, though my heart was clawing up my throat. "Come to dinner tonight. I have questions about some investments. Just us." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Isolation is both a tactic and a trap. Still, I needed to talk to my son face to face, where love can do its best work. That evening, Daniel sat at my kitchen table, the table where we had shared birthdays and casseroles, and the slow astonishments of a life rebuilt, and listened as I told him what I had heard outside his own home. Confusion flitted across his face. Then the anguish of a good man forced to balance the mother who raised him against the wife he chose. I slid the bank statements across the table. He traced the $500 withdrawals with one finger, as if the ink might smudge into a better meaning. "Even if this is theft," he whispered finally, "that doesn't mean murder." So I gave him the rest, the Thursday timeline, the lake curve, the word immediately in Sabrina's voice, like a stone dropped down a well. He put his head in his hands and stayed there a long time. When he looked up, some necessary part of him had hardened. "What do you need me to do first?" We started the next morning at 9 a.m. in the glass calm office of Margaret Torres, my financial advisor for 2 decades, a woman with 2 gifts, a mathematician's mind and a shepherd's patience. She reviewed the accounts without interrupting, then spoke as if we were mapping evacuation routes. Freeze the accounts Patrick touches. Move assets to protected trusts. Set alerts on any attempt to open new credit. Document every suspicious transfer in language a detective and a judge would love. "This is elder financial abuse," she said without drama. "And it may be more." She prepared a report thick with dates and amounts, a paper shield I could hold up if I did not live to say I told you so. At 1 p.m. we sat across from Detective Sarah Chen, no relation in a station that smelled of coffee and resolve. She read, asked 3 precise questions, and leaned back with her hands steepled. "We can open an investigation now." My mouth was dry, but my voice worked. "If you arrest him for theft today, we'll never prove attempted murder tomorrow night." She hated that answer. I hated it more. "Then we do both," she said finally. "You file everything? I put patrol cars in your neighborhood Thursday night, whether you like it or not." By 4 p.m., I had my car on a lift in Joe Martinez's shop. He has been my mechanic for 15 years, a man who can read the past and the future in the scuffs on a bolt. "Brake lines look fine," he said after 20 minutes. "But someone's been under here with tools. Practicing cuts." He showed me faint half-moons sketched into metal. The world swayed and then steadied. Daniel's jaw clenched like a locked door. On Thursday morning, Patrick hovered. "The weather looks rough for book club tonight," he said, glancing at the blue sky. "Maybe I should drive you." I smiled at him with all my teeth. I like driving at night. I said, "It makes me feel independent." After he left, I called Daniel. We met Joe again at 11 a.m. and installed 2 lifelines, a discreet backup brake system that would hold if the primary failed, and a tiny camera tucked into the shadow of the undercarriage. Set to send video straight to my phone. I parked in the driveway on purpose, placed my keys in their usual bowl, and told Patrick at 5 p.m. that I might drive fast to make up for running late. He reminded me about the dangerous lake curve, like a man rehearsing his favorite lines. At 6 p.m., my phone buzzed with a movement alert. The camera caught him in perfect clarity, Patrick on his back beneath my car, his hands sure and practiced as he scored the brake line almost through. When I walked downstairs an hour later, Patrick was lounging in the living room with a paperback open in his hands, the roses from his last shopping trip smiling from a vase nearby. His face carried the innocent ease of a man who thought he had already won. I smiled back, leaned down to kiss his cheek, and told him I might be home late. As I drove away, my phone pinged again with the alert, the thumbnail image a frozen frame of Patrick's hands beneath my car. I sent the clip to Daniel with a single line, "We have him?" The road to the community center was familiar, one I had driven for 20 years without thinking. That night, every block felt sharp, each shadow an enemy. My primary brakes sponged and sagged exactly as Joe had predicted, but the backup line caught like a hand on the shoulder, steadying me. Daniel followed in his car, headlights steady in my mirror. A tether I clung to. When we arrived, I stepped out with a smile, greeted friends, and pretended to care about the novel under discussion while my mind counted minutes. Daniel sat at the back, his presence announced, his loyalty visible to half a dozen witnesses. If the worst happened later, no one would be able to doubt where he had been. I excused myself early. Appointment in the morning. I lied. Mrs. Patterson patted my arm, murmuring sympathy. Daniel rose quietly, and we left together. He followed me home, headlights steady, until my driveway appeared in the beam. Patrick rushed out of the house, surprised to see us so soon. "You're early," he said, smiling the smile I had once thought meant safety. "How was book club cut short?" I replied lightly. Daniel stepped from his car and looked his stepfather in the eye. "We need to talk," he said. Patrick's smile faltered. "About what? About the footage from the camera under Mom's car?" Daniel's voice was steady, the kind of steady that makes liars flinch. Patrick's color drained as I opened my phone and pressed play. There he was on screen, every movement precise, every moment damning. He began to sputter denials, words like ridiculous and fake tumbling out with no conviction. I reminded him of the roses, of his tender hands on my shoulders, and of the line he had spoken to Sabrina about 45 miles per hour. His mouth snapped shut, the mask stripped bare. Daniel raised his head toward the road, and as if on cue, headlights swung into the driveway. Detective Chen stepped out first, her badge bright even in the dusk, followed by 2 patrol cars. "Patrick Morrison," she said, voice even. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Handcuffs glinted. Patrick met my gaze one last time. His expression not of anger, but of awe, as if he had never guessed the woman beside him could strike back. "How long have you known?" he whispered. "Long enough," I answered. "Long enough to make sure you'd never hurt anyone else." They led him away, and Detective Chen turned to me. "We picked up Sabrina an hour ago," she said. She was quick to talk once she believed Patrick already had. Relief washed over me like a tide I had been holding back for days. The story was no longer mine alone to carry. It was written in files and footage and sworn testimony. My son turned to me, eyes heavy with shame. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first." I touched his arm. "You believed me when it mattered. That's what counts." Months later, I sat in a courtroom watching justice unfold. Patrick stood stoic as the judge read the charges: 25 years for attempted murder and fraud. Sabrina sobbed openly, pleading guilty to conspiracy, sentenced to 15 years. The words of the judge were sharp and clear. The evidence of premeditation and the vulnerability of the victim makes this among the most serious crimes this court has seen. I sat upright, not as a victim, but as a witness to my own survival. After the trial, Daniel asked me the question that hovered in the silence between us. "How do you trust your judgment again after something like this?" I thought carefully before answering. "You trust again, slowly, Daniel. You learn to verify, to listen to instincts. You don't stop living just because someone tried to steal your life." He nodded, as if beginning to believe it himself. But the story did not end in that courtroom. 6 months later, with my accounts secure and my name no longer attached to their debts, I opened a small office downtown, Chen Protection Services. The sign read, "What began as survival had hardened into purpose." My first client, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a 70-year-old widow charmed by a man at the grocery store who now urged her to add him to her bank account. I recognized the script, the pattern, the predation. A background check revealed fraud charges trailing him across states like smoke. When I showed her, tears of relief came fast. I thought I was being paranoid. She whispered. Trusting your instincts isn't paranoia. I told her, it's survival. Within 6 months, I had helped 11 families. Some avoided fraud, others escaped abusive entanglements. One discovered a daughter's fiancé already married elsewhere. Each case reminded me of what Patrick and Sabrina had taught me through their betrayal. Predators thrive on silence and shame, but both can be broken by vigilance. My son said it best one night over dinner. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you become the foundation for the best things you end up doing. I had turned attempted murder into a mission. That, I thought, was justice enough. 1 year after Patrick and Sabrina's convictions, Chen Protection Services had already grown beyond anything I imagined. What began as me answering phone calls in a modest office had turned into a lifeline for families who felt a wrongness in their gut, but couldn't quite name it. Daniel encouraged me at every step, though I could still see the shadows Sabrina left in him. He dated cautiously. Every new person screened against public records before he even bought the first cup of coffee. Trust had become something earned slowly, and I understood that better than anyone. Then came Janet Patterson, a woman I'd known casually from my Thursday night book club. She called one morning, her voice tight with shame. Vivian, I think I need your help. I've been seeing a man named Robert. He's been wonderful, but lately he's been pressing me to invest $50,000 into his business. The words came out fast, like if she said them quickly enough, they might not sting. I listened carefully. Chance meeting at church, sudden romance, quick escalation to money. It was the oldest play in the con artist handbook. I asked to run a background check. She hesitated, then whispered, Is that really necessary? I told her the truth. It was insurance, not suspicion. 2 days later, the evidence was printed across my desk. Robert was actually Ronald Hayes, a man with a trail of fraud convictions spanning 3 states. He specialized in romance scams targeting book clubs and church groups. When Janet saw the file, her eyes filled. I almost gave him everything. She said, How do you ever trust again? You don't stop trusting. I told her gently. You trust, but you verify. And you surround yourself with people who've earned that trust over time. That case made local headlines when Ronald was arrested after Janet bravely wore a wire during his final pitch. Suddenly, Chen Protection Services was no longer just a small consultancy. People were calling from other states, from other cities, desperate for advice. I hired 2 investigators, both former law enforcement, and expanded into corporate background checks and asset protection plans. Within 2 years, we had helped over 50 families. The work mattered in a way my old investments never had. Each success was another life not wrecked, another widow who kept her house, another daughter who didn't marry into disaster. Daniel grew alongside the company. He had begun dating again, carefully, and eventually introduced me to Sarah, a school teacher with a calm steadiness that anchored him. Before their first coffee date, he confessed he'd asked me to run a background check. She thinks you're amazing, he admitted, embarrassed. I laughed. Caution isn't weakness, Daniel. It's wisdom hard-won. Over dinner one night, Sarah suggested I teach workshops for seniors, not just one-on-one consultations, but classes where people could learn to spot scams before they unfolded. Financial self-defense she called it. The phrase struck something deep in me, a parallel to the martial arts I had once practiced in my youth. Defense, but financial. Survival, but proactive. By the time 3 years had passed, Chen Protection Services had offices in 6 cities and a waiting list of clients. We had prevented millions in potential fraud, stopped abusive partners in their tracks, and given vulnerable families the tools to protect themselves. At 65, I had no plans of retiring. But then news arrived that reminded me of how this all began. Detective Chen called one morning. "Mrs. Morrison, Patrick died last night in prison. Heart attack." I sat with the silence for a long moment. Relief washed through me, not celebration. Just the final untangling of a thread I had been carrying too long. "Thank you for letting me know," I said quietly. Afterward, I stood before a workshop of 25 seniors and told them what I had told so many before. Legitimate people don't pressure you to move quickly. Love doesn't come with invoices. Protecting yourself isn't paranoia. It's wisdom. Their eyes followed me as if every word might shield them. And perhaps it could. Patrick was gone, but the lessons he had forced me to learn lived on in the protection I offered others. By 67, I shifted my role within the company. I promoted my senior investigator to managing director and focused on teaching, writing, and speaking. My book, Trust But Verify: A Widow's Guide to Financial Safety, became a national conversation starter. I spoke at conferences, churches, libraries, anywhere people gathered with open ears. Daniel and Sarah were married by then, and they often sat in the front row, their support the strongest currency I carried. Sabrina was still serving her sentence, with parole years away, but I no longer feared her. Time had stripped her of power. If she emerged unrepentant, she would find me stronger, not weaker. 10 years after I first pressed my ear against that window, I stood at a podium in front of 500 people at the National Conference on Elder Protection. I told my story not to relive it, but to show the patterns, the red flags, the ways silence keeps predators fed. Verification isn't suspicion, I said. It's wisdom. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They are survival. When the applause came, it wasn't just for me. It was for every survivor who had turned pain into armor. Chen Protection Services had grown to 12 cities, helping over 300 families. Daniel chaired the board now, guiding its mission with the care of a man who had seen firsthand how betrayal can bloom inside a family. My work had become legacy. And yet, as I packed an overnight bag one evening for an emergency trip to Dallas, an elderly man about to lose his home to a church acquaintance, I smiled. Most people my age played bridge or booked cruises. I boarded planes to fight con artists. That, I realized, was my cruise, my bridge, the life I was meant to live. The Dallas case became one of the most memorable of my career. A 91-year-old widower named Mr. Santos had been convinced to sign over his home to a much younger woman he met at church. She had presented herself as a caretaker, fussing over his meals, praising his sermons, and assuring him she would look after him in his final years. In exchange, she asked for the deed to his house for estate planning. It was a cruel performance, a script I had seen too many times. I arrived just hours before the signing was scheduled. With the help of Detective Chen's contacts, we ran a background check that exposed the woman's real name and a history of similar cons across 2 states. When I presented the evidence to Mr. Santos, his hands trembled. "I thought she cared about me." He whispered, "She cared about your house," I said gently. He canceled the signing, and by the next morning, she was in custody. These were the victories that sustained me. Each case carried a unique sting, but the pattern was always the same: predators wrapping themselves in affection until affection became a weapon. My job was not only to expose the lies, but also to restore dignity to those who felt ashamed for being deceived. Over time, I realized that shame was the predator's sharpest tool, sharper than any contract or hidden clause. If victims believed they were foolish, they would stay silent. Breaking that silence became my life's mission. By my 70s, Chen Protection Services had become a recognized name across the country. We weren't just a consultancy anymore. We were a shield. We handled corporate fraud, romance scams, inheritance manipulation, and elder abuse. We trained banks to spot unusual transfers, partnered with law enforcement to catch serial offenders, and taught seniors how to protect themselves online. My calendar filled with speaking engagements. Sometimes I wondered if I had retired from one career only to build a larger one, but I never regretted it. Purpose gives you energy in a way money never can. Daniel thrived as chairman of the board. He and Sarah built a warm, steady life, cautious but not afraid. He once told me, "Mom, you've taught me that trust isn't weakness. It's about making people prove they deserve it." His words told me he had healed, even if the scars remained. I watched him laugh with Sarah, saw the ease in his posture, and knew Sabrina's betrayal had not destroyed him. It had reshaped him into someone stronger, sharper, less willing to look away from danger. Patrick and Sabrina occasionally surfaced in the background of my thoughts. Patrick's death had closed one chapter, but Sabrina remained alive, serving out her time. When her parole hearing approached, reporters asked if I feared her release. I told them the truth. Fear is what predators count on. I don't give it to them anymore. If Sabrina emerged unchanged, she would find me a very different woman than the one who once welcomed her into my kitchen. At 72, I began focusing on prevention. Speaking to rooms of 500 people, I would begin with my story: the overheard voices, the break lines, the roses on the counter. Then I would pivot to the lessons, the patterns of fraud, the red flags, the strategies anyone could use to protect themselves. Predators count on you to be polite. I would say, on you not wanting to offend, not wanting to ask questions. But asking questions is survival. Verification is wisdom. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are life preservers. People leaned forward in their chairs, scribbling notes, nodding with dawning recognition. Each nod felt like another life pulled back from the cliff. The book I wrote, Trust But Verify, became a touchstone for families across the country. Letters arrived, weekly, children thanking me for helping them talk to their aging parents, widows confessing that my story gave them the courage to question a boyfriend who had appeared from nowhere, retirees saying they had walked away from scams because they recognized the pattern. Every letter felt like proof that the pain I endured had been alchemized into something valuable. Daniel, ever thoughtful, once asked me if I had any regrets. I looked at him across our dinner table, where Sarah served homemade soup, and thought carefully. Regrets? Yes. I said, I regret trusting people who did not deserve it. I regret the pain they caused you. But I don't regret surviving, and I don't regret using that survival to protect others. He nodded, and in his eyes I saw not just my son, but the man he had become through fire and betrayal. As I entered my late 70s, I slowed my travel, but never my mission. Younger investigators carried the fieldwork while I focused on teaching and mentoring. Chen Protection Services had branches in 12 cities, each carrying the torch we had lit in that first small office. Our investigators had prevented millions of dollars in fraud, dismantled abusive networks, and saved countless families from devastation. I had not simply survived attempted murder, I had built a legacy from it. When I look back on that afternoon outside my daughter-in-law's window, I no longer see only betrayal. I see the beginning of a long arc, one that bent away from destruction and toward protection. Patrick and Sabrina thought they could end my life for money. Instead, they gave me a mission larger than either of them could have imagined. At 78, I was still answering calls, still boarding planes when needed, still telling rooms full of strangers that their instincts were worth listening to. That, I realized, was the truest revenge, not bitterness, not fear, but a life repurposed into something stronger and more meaningful than greed could ever destroy. Thank you for being part of this story. If you found value in it, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of survival and strength. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your thoughts, or share your own experience. Your voice matters here,